there was no first human family. Not in the way we think of it. There was no Adam and Eve in a quiet garden. There was no single moment where a mother and a father looked at their child and a family was born. The story is much longer, messier, and more interesting than that. It's a story of slow change. It happened over millions of years in the hot dust of Africa. It's the story of how an ape-like creature driven by a changing world became something new. It's the story of us. To find the roots of the human family, we have to go back. Way back, maybe 3 or 4 million years. We have to look at creatures like Australopithecus. Lucy was one of them. They weren't human yet, but they weren't apes anymore either. They were something in between. They were the crucial step, and the biggest thing about them was how they moved. They walked on 2 legs. This sounds simple, but it changed everything. For millions of years, our ancestors had lived in the trees. The forest was their home. It was safe. It had food. But the world was changing. The great forests of Africa were shrinking. Grasslands, the savanna, were spreading out. This new world was full of danger. Lions, hyenas, saber-toothed cats. It was also full of opportunity. Herds of animals, roots, tubers buried in the ground. To survive out there, you couldn't just be a good tree climber anymore. You had to be good on the ground. Walking upright, or bipedalism, was the answer. It let our ancestors see over the tall grass. They could spot predators from farther away. They could also spot food. It was also a more efficient way to travel long distances. A chimp can run fast for a short burst, but a human can walk or jog for miles and miles without overheating. This was perfect for life on the open savanna, but the most important change wasn't about seeing or walking. It was about the hands. When you walk on 2 legs, your hands are free. Free for what? To carry things. This is the seed of the human family. An ape can't carry much. It needs its hands for walking. An Australopithecine could pick up a rock. It could pick up a stick. It could pick up a child. And most importantly, it could pick up food and carry it somewhere else. Think about what that means. A chimpanzee male finds a fig tree. He eats the figs. He doesn't carry them back to his mate or his offspring. They have to find their own food. But a hominin male who finds a dead antelope on the savanna can now do something revolutionary. He can tear off a piece of meat and carry it back to his group. He can provision. He can share. This act of carrying food back to a home base is the economic foundation of the family. It starts to create a new social dynamic. A female, perhaps busy with a young child, doesn't have to forage for every single calorie herself. She can rely on others. A male can contribute directly to the survival of his offspring in a way his ape cousins could not. This creates a bond, a dependency, a reason to stick together. But walking on 2 legs came with a terrible price. It required a redesigned pelvis. The hips had to become narrower and more bowl-shaped to support the weight of the upper body and keep us balanced. This worked great for walking. It was a disaster for giving birth. At the same time this was happening, another trend was taking hold. Our brains were getting bigger. A bigger brain is a huge advantage. It lets you solve problems. It lets you remember where the water hole is. It lets you figure out how to crack open a bone to get the marrow inside. But a bigger brain means a bigger head, so you have a terrible evolutionary conflict. A narrower birth canal and a baby with a bigger head. This is called the obstetrical dilemma. It is a defining feature of being human. The solution our bodies found was to give birth to our babies ridiculously early. A human baby is born completely helpless. A newborn foal can stand up and walk within an hour. A newborn chimp can cling to its mother's fur. A human baby can't do anything. It can't hold its own head up. It can't find food. It can't regulate its own body temperature very well. It is utterly, totally dependent. This helplessness is the emotional and biological glue of the human family. A chimp mother can mostly raise her infant on her own. She carries it with her, it clings to her, and she forages for both of them. A human mother cannot. She has a squirming, useless infant that needs to be held constantly. She cannot gather food effectively while carrying this baby. She cannot defend herself from a predator. She needs help. Who helps her? The father. This is where the idea of a pair bond, a special relationship between a male and a female, starts to make sense. In most primate species, males and females mate, and then the male goes on his way. He doesn't know which offspring are his, and he doesn't really invest in any of them. But in this new hominin world, things were different. A male who stuck around and helped a female had a much better chance of his own offspring surviving. How did he help? By bringing her food. by protecting her and the baby from predators. It becomes a trade. The male provides resources and protection, the female provides more certain paternity. This is a radical departure from the primate norm. It's the beginning of something that looks a bit like a modern couple. It wasn't about love or romance in our sense, it was about survival. A male who provided for a female and her child was ensuring his own genes passed on. A female who chose a good provider was ensuring her child would live to grow up. This bond was likely not the strict, lifelong monogamy we sometimes imagine. It was probably more flexible. But the core idea of a cooperative relationship between a male and a female, centered around raising a helpless child, was a revolutionary step. It created a small, stable unit at the heart of the larger group. So what was life like for this little family unit? It was hard, it was dangerous. They probably lived in small groups, maybe 15 to 30 individuals. These weren't just parents and children. They were likely extended kin, aunts, uncles, cousins, and maybe even grandparents. They were nomadic, moving across the landscape following the seasons and the food. Their day would start with the sun. There were no lights to keep them awake at night. The dark was terrifying, a time for predators. They likely slept in trees or on cliff ledges, anywhere that offered some protection. As the sun rose, the group would stir. The first order of business was always food and water. There was probably a division of labor, but not as rigid as we once thought. The old picture of man the hunter, woman the gatherer is too simple. For one thing, they probably weren't doing much big game hunting yet. They were brilliant scavengers. If a lion killed a wildebeest, they would wait. They would watch, and when the big predators were done, they would rush in. With stone tools, they could do what other animals couldn't. They could smash open the leg bones to get the rich, fatty marrow inside. They could slice off scraps of meat left on the carcass. This was men's work, but it was incredibly risky. It required cooperation, communication, and courage. While some males might be out scavenging or looking for opportunities, the women were the backbone of the daily economy. They were the gatherers, they knew the land intimately, they knew which plants were edible and which were poison. They knew where to find nuts, berries, insects, and bird eggs. They probably used digging sticks to unearth nutritious roots and tubers. This gathered food was the reliable daily bread. The scavenged meat was a rare, valuable bonus. And all this time, the children were there. The very young, the helpless infants were held. By their mothers, yes, but also by others. An older sibling, an aunt, a grandmother. This is another uniquely human trait, cooperative breeding. We are one of the few species where individuals who are not the parents actively help raise the young. The role of grandmothers might have been especially important. This is called the grandmother hypothesis. In most primate species, when a female can no longer reproduce, she dies soon after. But human females can live for decades after menopause. Why? An older woman is a library of knowledge. She knows where the water is in a drought. She knows which plants can be used as medicine. And because she is not having her own babies anymore, she is free to help her daughters and granddaughters raise theirs. She can hold the baby while the mother forages. She can process tough foods for toddlers who can't chew them yet. A grandmother's help could make the difference between a child living or dying. Her presence would have strengthened family bonds and allowed her own daughter to have more children sooner. She was investing in her own genetic legacy. Life was a constant series of challenges. Finding food was a full-time job. Avoiding being food was just as important. The world was full of things that wanted to eat them. They had to be constantly vigilant. The cry of a certain bird could mean a leopard was near. A rustle in the grass could be a snake. The group was their only defense. Alone, a hominin was weak and vulnerable. But together, they could make noise, throw rocks, and present a more intimidating front. The safety was in numbers. What about their inner lives? What did they think and feel? We can't know for sure, but we can make some good guesses. They certainly felt fear. The fear of a predator's roar in the night. The fear of a child's fever. They felt hunger. The gnawing emptiness in the belly that drove their every waking moment. They probably felt a deep sense of belonging to their group. The comfort of sitting together at the end of the day, grooming each other, touching, reinforcing social bonds. Grooming is not just about cleaning fur for primates, it's a social currency. It builds trust and eases tension. For our ancestors, it would have been a vital part of daily life. Did they feel love? The bond between a mother and her helpless infant must have been incredibly powerful, just as it is today. That dependency forges a connection that is primal. The bond between a male and female who relied on each other for survival, who shared food and protected each other, might not be our modern idea of romantic love, but it was a form of deep attachment. They would have felt grief. When a member of the group died, especially a child, the loss would have been real. We see grief in other social animals like elephants and chimpanzees. It's not a stretch to imagine our ancestors feeling it too. How did they communicate? They didn't have language as we know it. There was no grammar, no syntax. But they were not silent. They would have had a rich system of calls, grunts, and hoots, much like modern apes. A call to warn of a snake would be different from a call to warn of an eagle. A grunt of contentment would be different from a cry of pain, and they had their hands. With hands free, they could gesture. Pointing is a profound act. It directs another's attention to something in the world. Look, there, food, or look, danger, body language, posture, facial expressions. All of this would have formed a complex communication system. It was in these small cooperative groups where the need to share information about food, predators, and social relationships was so intense that the first pressures for better and better communication began. Their language was born around the family campfire, not in a lecture hall. So, this first family was a messy, practical, and resilient unit. It wasn't a neat little box of mom, dad, and 2 kids. It was a fluid group of related individuals, centered around the powerful bond between mothers and their incredibly needy children. It was held together by the practical need for food sharing and mutual defense. The pair bond between a male and a female was a strategy, not a rule. The division of labor was flexible. Everyone, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child old enough to forage, likely contributed in some way. This social structure was a feedback loop with our biology. The need to cooperate to raise helpless, big-brain babies drove us to become more social. Being more social required bigger, more complex brains to keep track of all the relationships, the favors owed, the rivalries. A bigger brain required more calories, especially high-quality food like meat and marrow. Getting that meat required cooperation, tool use, and even more brain power. And it all came back to the helpless baby. The family wasn't just a consequence of our evolution, it was the engine driving it. Over the next couple million years, this basic model was refined. Brains got bigger. Our tools got more sophisticated. Hunting became more important than scavenging. With the control of fire, everything changed again. A campfire provides warmth. It keeps predators away. It allows you to cook food, making it easier to digest and unlocking more nutrients. But more than anything, a fire creates a stable, safe center for the group. The home base. Around the fire at night, the family would gather. This was the first living room. It was a place for sharing food, a place for making tools, a place for social bonding. And it was a place for communication. As the light faded, they would have had more time for social interaction. It's here, in the flickering firelight, that the grunts and gestures might have slowly, over countless generations, evolved into something more. The first stories, the first shared plans, the first true language, the family unit that emerged from this long process was incredibly successful. It allowed a physically weak, slow primate to survive and then thrive in a world full of stronger, faster animals. It created a unique learning environment. The long childhood of a human, that period of utter dependency, is also a period of intense learning. A human child isn't just learning how to find food, they are learning the incredibly complex rules of their social world. Who to trust, how to share, how to read emotions, how to communicate. The family is the first school. So when we ask what the first human family was like, the answer is that it was a survival strategy. It was a web of dependencies. It was a mother holding a child that could not survive without her. It was a father carrying food back to share, investing in his own legacy. It was a grandmother showing a toddler which berries to eat. It was a group of brothers and cousins standing together to scare off a hyena. It was messy, tough, and pragmatic. There was no one moment. There was no single family. There was just a slow grinding process of change, but the pressures were always the same. How do you feed yourself? How do you stay safe? And how do you raise a child with a brain so big it has to be born too soon? The solution to all those problems was the family. Not the nuclear family of the 1950s, but something far more ancient and adaptable. A cooperative, multi-generational group bound by kinship and the brutal necessities of life. The echoes of that ancient family are still with us. Our need for connection, our instinct to protect our children, our capacity for cooperation, our love of sitting with friends around a fire. It all started there, on the long road out of the trees and into the open, under the African sun. That was our first home, and that was our first family.